Was Cyberpunk 2077 always good? That's a question I'm genuinely asking because I find hard to answer myself. Over the last few years, I've seen numerous articles from journalists I follow, received texts from friends in group chats, and scrolled past posts from strangers online, all saying the same thing: that Cyberpunk 2077 was a masterpiece. A misunderstood masterpiece, if anything. That the characters were unforgettable. That the world was exceptionally realized. That Keanu was awesome. That it was straight up one of the best games ever made. All of this before even the launch of Phantom Liberty and the game's 2.0 overhaul. I was beginning to think I was crazy. Was this true? That I was missing out on a game I played for some 20 odd hours and thought was actually fine at best, and honestly, more bad than good? I couldn't make sense of the claims. While some argued the game was fixed now and worth trying out, others were saying it was actually always good. But in my opinion, much of the claims that the game was a masterpiece never talked about the one thing I had a problem with when I first tried playing the game. Simply, that Cyberpunk wasn't punk enough. That most of the narrative within the main and side quests of the game failed to understand its own genre. In this regard, how could Cyberpunk come even remotely close to being a masterpiece? Or was it something that Phantom Liberty and 2.0 could address? So I did what any good choom would do. I re-downloaded the game in 2024 to find out if they really did fix Cyberpunk. Or to confirm my suspicion that maybe, just maybe, Cyberpunk 2077 still doesn't understand itself.
Wake the fuck up, gamer. We've got a video essay to burn. This is Save Room.
It's hard to understate just how bad the Cyberpunk launch was back in 2020. It both feels like just yesterday and simultaneously forever ago that PlayStation pulled down the game from its own storefront. But you know this, you remember, right? It was worse than a bad launch. It was a disaster. It wasn't just that the game was buggy as hell or that much of the game was just broken. It was that it was basically feature incomplete, with CD Projekt failing to deliver on their promise of making what we expected to be another rich open-world game. I mean, it was so bad it didn't even have its proper warnings up yet when you launched the game, causing a reviewer to have a seizure. It was straight up one of the worst launches in video game history. Naturally, I bought the game. More specifically, I bought it for the PS5. I was sort of at a halfway point between needing to know just how bad it really was, while also having faith that playing the game on upgraded hardware might solve a lot of the issues present on both the PS4 and Xbox One. And since many reviewers were highly impressed with the game's narrative, despite some of the post-launch bugs and even if they were playing on PC, the allure of possibly another acclaimed CD Projekt RPG was enough to drive my curiosity. Really, I wanted to give the game an honest shake and try to see past the bugs. For the most part, it was not the piece of shit many videos made it out to be. Not immediately, anyway. I managed to get through roughly 2/3 of the game just fine, actually. Spending countless hours popping a gummy, roaming Night City, and checking out photo mode to take pictures of my V in what I genuinely thought was a visually well-realized world. I was sort of in my element, just vibing in Cyberpunk. Unfortunately, that only took me so far. Every time I sat to play, every time I thought about the game's genre for more than a minute, I couldn't help but feel like something was off about Cyberpunk. Like it wasn't the game thematically that I was sold. Suddenly, I started seeing patterns of how CD Projekt kept falling short of realizing the game as a thematic meditation. Basically, I thought the writing was kinda bad.
Holy cyber cow. We're on TV.
There were the problems with the over-sexualization of women, justifying nudity with bodily augmentations, but only ever showing just women. Unless you open your menu, take off your clothes, and look at your own penis. Straight up, here's Cyberpunk's game director talking about a kidnapped woman and explicitly saying she holds less humanity because of her augmentations. Never mind those that committed the crime in the first place. Similarly, Johnny was an arrogant, immature impression of what a teen thinks cool should be, spouting lines that were frequently laughable and off-putting.
Another time, Chumbas.
And as much as I loved Mi Hermano Jackie, and even some of the ways CD Projekt wove in other cultures, specifically Mexican.
Get some more Chile action up in here, and you're looking at Mama Well's signature sopa de fideos.
The lines in Spanish usually ended up being the same tired Google Translate lines you'd find from a Hollywood movie. The lines that make you say, dude, nobody talks like that.
You skilled enough to kill it all?
Mucho more than enough.
Some shriveled abuela in Mexico sold it to him.
Hey, catch, vato! Mi madre always said patience pays off, so...
Even if the game was in the undeniably broken state that it was for so many people, it was ultimately not the thing that let me down about Cyberpunk. Not by a long shot. Simply that it kept refusing to engage with itself as a cyberpunk text. It refused to examine its own genre. And that just didn't scream masterpiece to me. I was frustrated. I was angry. Angry that the game positioned itself as a mature meditation on one of my favorite subgenres of science fiction, but couldn't deliver something insightful. Annoyed that online rhetoric tried to convince me that this was the game CD Projekt was trying to tell me it was. Of course, it wasn't. It's as if I were playing a cyberpunk game written by the guy who wrote Ready Player One. Weak, immature, half-realized. Before long, I couldn't bring myself to beat the game and ended up putting it down. Permanently shelved as did not complete. Nearly 3 years after launch, Cyberpunk 2.0 began to roll out across PC and next-gen systems, bringing a complete overhaul to the game's systems and mechanics. It featured an entirely new skill tree, a revamped wanted system, AI enhancements, introduced car combat, updated UI, improved NPC and traffic behavior, improved vehicle handling, improved everything, and so much more. In short, it was the update that fulfilled the promise of what Cyberpunk should have been at launch, with CD Projekt going so far as to make a tongue-in-cheek reference that
The game is fixed.
in the launch commercial for Phantom Liberty. The only catch is that CD Projekt recommended starting an entire new save, as previous saves with 1.xx versions would result in encountering various bugs that would affect progress. It was easier just to start over. And that's what I did. After seeing countless videos of cracked out, hyper-violent gameplay, after seeing the multiple PC mods that made the game look ultra-realistic, after Phantom Liberty's glowing reception of Cyberpunk's action and its position as so-called role-playing peak, after no one over the course of 3 years on social media citing anything about the narrative that would justify the claims that 2077 was indeed a masterpiece, other than Gene Park, shout out Gene Park, I re-downloaded the game onto my PS5 and began what would be a nearly 3-month journey of figuring out whether or not CD Projekt actually fixed Cyberpunk, to see if I had been missing something from my original analysis, to see if improvements were made beyond the systems and gameplay that would make the game more punk. In many ways, they did. But for the most part, it was still the same game I remembered with slight disdain. Well, sort of. My head. I'm having cognitive dissonance. It's sort of easy to forget that the word cyberpunk means something. Something beyond pointing to the game as a subgenre of science fiction. Cyberpunk is, after all, a literary genre, with the suffix punk denoting specific criticisms of institutions and meditations on themes commonly present in science fiction. In other words, punk means something here. The problem is that many modern games completely disregard any sort of major critique when they call their game insert genre punk, emphasizing setting and aesthetics without saying much about them in their respective genre. It's sort of a rampant issue, especially in the games industry. Take a look at the Starfield Direct just before release, and you'll hear Bethesda describe the aesthetic of their game as
NASA punk.
pointing to the design of their ships and clothes, but without doing any sort of criticism of the, I guess, NASA aesthetic. In reality, the word NASA punk doesn't really mean anything. Not in this context, anyway. On this, our very own editor Ben Sledge says it best in his article, Why is Everything Punk Now?, stating very matter-of-factly, words have meaning. Cyberpunk 2077 frequently comes short of any real criticism in this regard. Don't get me wrong, I think the design of Night City does a lot of the legwork to show off just how disparate the people of 2077 are forced to live, even just in the way it's realized visually. In fact, I'd go so far as to say it's one of the best open worlds ever designed in that regard. Streets are busy, not just with traffic, but with advertisements that don't just draw, but clog visual attention. A representation of a society obsessed with consumption. People are crammed into buildings where communities stack on top of each other like bricks, and the trash that lines residencies is easily ignored by the screens that serve to distract. Immigrants are segregated, relegated to the residual corners of dilapidated boroughs where the streets are barely even drivable. A stark contrast from the paved highways of the rich man Corpo Plaza. This is a society that wears its inequalities on its sleeves and promotes it as a dream. In Night City, you too can become legend. Driving around the streets of Night City, whether at night or in the rain or in the middle of a sunny day, the feeling is always the same. This is a society rooted in awesome neglect. And it's in this design where the genre of cyberpunk is best represented. The problem then comes with the game's narrative consistently de-emphasizing the core tenets of what makes the genre of cyberpunk the anti-capitalist, anti-establishment, anti-discriminatory punk genre that it is. One of which is the way the game treats its cops. Representations of police in cyberpunk media isn't a new thing. In fact, it's practically a core staple. Whether it's the police-sanctioned bounty hunters of Neuromancer and Blade Runner, the federal agents of Ghost in the Shell, or augmented officers of Deus Ex, each entry uses police presence to highlight some of our own socio-political issues in a hyper-realized world. Brutality, corruption, corporate interference. These are all problems present in our own world that are heavily dissected in cyberpunk stories. And sometimes, the best way to scrutinize these institutions is by undermining them with protagonists inside these organizations, to question their practices firsthand and deny their immoral practices altogether. This is where the punk in Cyberpunk rears its head the biggest. Cyberpunk 2077 frequently wavers back and forth across this line, reticent to ever fully cross it in order to say something about its institutions, especially cops. It's easy to say that 2077 frequently has us helping cops.
On behalf of the NCPD, thank you. Fuck.
On the surface, yeah, that's true. Side quests like River Wards have V essentially function as an extension of the police by playing detective and acting as agent both for the NCPD and the likes of mayoral candidate Jefferson Perales. Sure, in reality, you help uncover both political and police corruption, and admittedly solve a prescient case about abduction through internet luring. But the result is pretty much cut and dry. River returns back to the force that had ousted him, and we join his family for a celebratory dinner. Not that there's anything wrong with having a very human moment amidst River's harsh reality, but that it embodies Cyberpunk's trend of sympathizing with police at nearly every opportunity. How very punk indeed, Cyberpunk. Think about it. One of the very first side quests you encounter in the game, if not the first, is a time-sensitive mission to save your neighbor, Barry Lewis, from suicide after quitting the police force. Saving him results in what is honestly a pretty touching conversation about depression and the toll Night City takes on its constituents. It's as close to punk as this side quest ever gets here. But failing results in a fellow officer collapsing in tears outside his apartment after discovering Barry has killed himself. It's the first time the officer, Juan Mendez, shows any sort of compassion for Barry, who had previously dismissed his state of mind. This particular ending to the Happy Together quest is supposed to play as a tragedy, a representation of the state of Night City, that even the cops are having a hard time. And while, sure, that may be true, and we can certainly empathize with Officer Lewis, in reality, there still hasn't been any legwork to show how these same constraints have affected people who are actively victims of these forces, both of police and corporate political interest. Barry's suicide isn't a critique of the institution of the NCPD, it's a symptom of it, one that needs to be interrogated, meditated on, scrutinized. Instead, it's passively accepted as a harsh byproduct of the socio-economic climate of Night City and of Cyberpunk 2077 altogether. It begs for your sympathy. And for the record, these problems exist even in Phantom Liberty, where helping a federal agent involves helping a corrupt politician help a couple of corrupt cops get away with drug trafficking. Never scrutinizing, always helping. Again, it's clear to see the corruption at play in Night City here, but the action of playing the quest has us be, in the end, and once again, the sympathizers of the police force. And regardless of how we each individually feel about police in real life, that's just not how the genre should operate. Certainly not a game that calls itself Cyberpunk. Take a look at the in-game description for the NCPD, where the framing positions the police not as agents of oppression, but as victims of dystopia. That through lack of funding and equipment, through lack of staff and lack of gratitude, they are driven to corruption and brutality. That some of these within the organization are still quote-unquote the good ones, that believe in the symbol of the badge. That they are simply doing their best. And this is a problem. When one of the core tenets of cyberpunk criticism is given a lens in which the police are seen not as an institution in need of reform or considerable dismantling, but as a collective group of victims which require sympathy, that corruption is and was an inevitability for those that don the badge, ones we should feel sorry they have to submit to, that it's your fault they have to respond with brutality and apathy,
To arrest you at any moment.
and that they should be thanked all the while? I can't help but question if Cyberpunk 2077 even understands the words it's using in its own title. Fuck that. We've been dealing with that kind of rhetoric for years, especially in North America. We're on the precipice of becoming our own cyberpunk reality, where unregulated AI malpractice from our corporate overseers quickly and efficiently works to exacerbate our climate crisis, of which we are nearly on the border of a point of no return. Where you grow up reading about the plight of African American leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., but feel like no considerable progress has been made for people of color in the States. Where you hear stories about the LA riots from your educators in the wake of the beating of Rodney King by police officers, but see the same acts carried out year after year. Where you see communities publicly back the killing of teens like Trayvon Martin, and where even the Supreme Court judges and state governors in 2024 turn their back on innocent men like Marcellus Williams sitting in death row for crimes they did not commit, even with DNA evidence proving their innocence. In our cyberpunk world, racism and violence isn't just rampant, it's state-sanctioned, a cog in the wheel of the institution, a feature of the machine. So, when I play a game set in near-future Los Angeles, self-titled after the genre meant to take aim at the institutions inspired by real-world US politics, but repeatedly fall short of any sort of sustained criticism, I can't help but wonder what CD Projekt meant when they say the game is fixed now. In this regard, CD Projekt hasn't even touched Cyberpunk. Look, it's not like 2077 is completely devoid of criticizing corruption, despite the actions of V flirting with it across several quests. It's actually pretty explicit most of the time, especially when voiced by the opinions of one rockstar Johnny Silverhand. If there's anyone that's punk or based as shit, it's probably him. The problem is that his writing frequently undermines these beliefs with borderline immature lines bragging about his impressive cock.
You're starting to remind me of me, 50 years back. Minus the charisma. An impressive cock.
For the bulk of the game, Johnny is really more caricature of what someone thinks punk is supposed to look like, rather than an additional vehicle to help us criticize the world of Night City. And that completely makes us undermine anything he has to say, even when it's of possible substance. Because our immediate reaction to many of his ridiculous ramblings is usually to simply ignore him or shut him down. In the end, punk becomes rhetoric for no one and made to ridicule. And really, most of the city is like this too. Graffiti on walls reads broken, as if it were the forehead tattoo of Jared Leto's Joker. I know people who use subtext, and they're all cowards. Butts jiggle on grinning faces, plastered on giant billboards. Those and other toys line the windows of shop after shop after shop. And this is still after they patch the game to include less of these. There's no real commentary here. These things just exist to express a perverse society enraptured by pleasure while simultaneously numb from its own consumption. In the end, it's just additional set dressing. Aesthetics to showcase ray tracing and reconstruction available on the latest NVIDIA card. We are just as much consumers of Night City as the NPCs that exist in the world of 2077. And to be honest, this is much of my frustration with the way the world is realized in Cyberpunk, where a character can say something insightful about the world they're living in, something that's actually in line with the genre, but then immediately fall back to binary modes of depicting the world, the likes in which you'd find in early video games that tried to showcase some kind of morality system. Do you want the good ending or the bad ending? Again, that's not how the genre works. Obviously, the game doesn't believe that corporations are the good guys of Night City society. Both Arasaka and Militech are frequently the antagonists of much of both the city's and V's problems. But what I love is that V's growing relationship with Takamura works to highlight that tension between corpo and vigilante. It's smart to have this guy who has devoted his life to Arasaka start to realize how quickly he'd be betrayed in the company's pursuit of vested interests. This should be one of the game's biggest explorations. And yet, at the first chance it gets, it's reduced to that same aforementioned binary by way of text message. Takamura is either corporate scum that should not be trusted, or he's representative of all corporate agents we can all get along with. All thematic meditation here, gone without so much as any sort of pageantry. Who needs complexity, anyway? At this point, after 30-some hours and surpassing where I left the game the first time I played, I figured my criticisms were mostly crystallized. I had most of the main quests done with only a few left, and a couple of side quests I wanted to wrap up. But I knew if I was going to give Cyberpunk its full shake, I'd have to dig deeper, to find out if there was anything more for how the game depicts its genre and V's story. So I decided it was only right that I buy the DLC and jump into Phantom Liberty before I'd complete the game.
Sure, no fucking problem.
I won't lie, despite knowing Phantom Liberty was a considerable step up from the major quest lines of the base game, I still held my reservations about the DLC altogether. Sure, off the bat, the stakes were much higher, and its opening action set piece was legitimately impressive, but I was immediately disappointed when the game devolved into what was yet another cop roleplay through the characters of Solomon Reed and President Myers. In my opinion, the game hadn't yet earned another supposed analysis of a federal agency and the government that controls it. I was unconvinced CD Projekt could meditate on the material to say something insightful within the genre. I was prepared for the worst. Instead, what I assumed would be a high-octane spy action DLC ended up turning into more of a melodramatic tech-noir thriller, elevated by characters who all seem to be hanging on to the fringes of their moral complexities by their very last threads, leaving the decision for how we navigate everyone's intricate motivations up to us. In short, everything after the monumental battle with the Chimera slowed down to just the right pace, allowing questline narratives and relationships to shine like they really hadn't before. It was all sort of clicking together piece by piece.
Well, I found myself in Night City with a bounty on my head.
It helps that everyone's performance feels multifaceted. While it's easy to see how effortless Idris Elba can play the cold, stoic secret agent, his performance as Reed, long-term, actually comes across as something more solemn. He's a man still living in the past, one full of regret and haunting immorality. He's remorseful yet bound by duty to the NUS. And that constant push and pull is what allows the interplay of Phantom Liberty's moral complexity to start to shine. Johnny is surprisingly given this same treatment. Rather than the cocky, arrogant one-liners we'd grown accustomed to from base Cyberpunk, Phantom Liberty's Johnny equally matches Reed's energy. After all, V is nearing the end of what limited time he has left. And in turn, Johnny responds to that with more moments of earnest reflection. There's real, mature camaraderie here, and it really does elevate the experience. But most of all, it's Somi who makes Phantom Liberty's quest shine the brightest. Like Reed, so too does Song make us question her true intentions. In many ways, and in one very literal, mortal way, she's just like V, albeit one more desperate to save herself. This makes her actions throughout the DLC less opaque, as we never really know the full extent as to what she may be hiding from both V and Reed, adding another layer of intrigue we have to balance and try to maneuver through. We don't really know who we should be trusting, at least not completely. Having these three shifting lines of character representation, with Reed, Johnny, and Somi, makes empathizing and rationalizing with each one of them a constant uncertainty, one that is equally entertaining as it is complicated to try and deduce. And although Phantom Liberty's ending relies on the same simple binaries from the base game, it also doesn't mean the journey itself wasn't worth the trouble. For the first time since the base game, I felt like Cyberpunk was actually offering more nuance to how characters approach their dystopic reality. When vanilla 2077 resorted to simple binaries we could easily deny, here was actual complexity for us to consider. In the long run, again, that really did make an impact. Moreover, it was the pacing of the quests themselves that sort of made me take a step back and look at Cyberpunk more holistically, rather than hyper-analyze points of contention I didn't agree with. Phantom Liberty frequently posits its quests, asking you to wait a day, sometimes more, to continue down the main path. And while you could easily skip time and get right back to the story, it also provides opportunity to engage with more of its side content. And that's exactly what I did. Every time Phantom Liberty forced me to wait for its next mission, I'd use the opportunity to strengthen my relationship with one of Cyberpunk's side characters, specifically Judy and Panam. And I'm glad I did because it provided some of the best experiences of the game for when I needed them most. Not for any action set piece or anything like that, but for conversations where I'd sit back and listen to two characters swap core values of how they viewed the world. Eventually, I found what would become V's salvation through these relationships, the first real ones I felt since Jackie from the prologue. I went swimming to the bottom of a lake with Judy. I sat and watched the stars with Panam. I found another Delamain. I'd buy Panam flowers and eagerly return to V's apartment to talk to her about my time with Reed in Dogtown. I'd drive the distances to and from everywhere, every single time. Never fast traveling, always admiring the limited amount of time I had left in the game. And not only did it help recontextualize Night City, it helped me recontextualize my entire experience with Cyberpunk. Eventually, I found myself relishing in the quiet and the loud moments of the main quests. I still look back at them fondly. More than anything, Phantom Liberty helped put Cyberpunk for me into context. For so long, I clung onto this desperation of both finding some sort of acceptance or answer or semblance of philosophy for V that I realized I forgot to stop and breathe, to live, to exist, to experience. After all, is that not the point of living? Before long, I realized what Cyberpunk 2077 offered was a different kind of punk. Perhaps one less explicit. A different way to combat the hyper-capitalistic grip of Night City. People and relationships. I realized then that I could finally see where the love of the game ultimately came from. Not that it was from the way it handled the genre, but for the way it handled relationships by forming a sense of humanity through community. Through these relationships, I could embody a new sense of punk. So, in between quests, in between set pieces and chases and killings and augmentations and scrounging for eddies, I'd do what any person with a limited time on this planet would do. I'd dance. I'd get that drink at the afterlife. I'd drive around with Pacific radio cranked to its max. I'd watch a sunrise. And it hit me. Isn't this how we all deal with our own decaying environments? By foregrounding the human experience in what little ways we can that ultimately remind us that we are more than just the constituents of our oppressed and hyper-capitalistic societies, but a person that exists. Is the ultimate fight against dystopia not to express our humanity through experience and relationships? Maybe. And just as I began to approach the ending of the game, I found myself nostalgic for a city I knew I'd be having to leave behind.
Bid the city farewell. We won't see it again.
In the end, I chose a life of possibility for V, opting to leave the city of dreams and the chance to become legend in favor of something more personal and priceless. A life of love. I took one last melancholic look at the city I only recently started falling in love with, and said goodbye. With Pan Am at my side, I watched the stars one final time, not knowing if the promise of fixing the engram in my head would work or not. Even if I didn't, this life was worth it. As I watched the credits roll, I felt this deep inner conflict as I tried to ask those same lingering questions I'd been asking for nearly 4 years. For so long, I had dismissed Cyberpunk as a frequently immature take on the genre. And perhaps I still stand by that. But underneath that reading was something surprisingly profound. Something that actually resonated. A deeply humane response to its genre. And maybe this is where all my hangups were satisfied. That I was too busy hyperfixated on what CD Projekt failed to fix. The understanding of its own genre. That I failed to see how it offered something different. Of course, it matters that Cyberpunk doesn't address the institutions in its genre to the best of its abilities. But it also doesn't mean it's completely apathetic in its fight against dystopian malaise. Not when there's so much room to color in relationships with people and reconstruct a sense of purpose outside the constraints of Night City. At least, that's what I found for myself, for V and Pan Am, as I watched them drive away into the desert. After all, if you can't dismantle the institution, why not hit them where it hurts and deny them the opportunity to ever even hit you back? So, when people online ask if Cyberpunk is a masterpiece, I find myself hesitating to answer. Not that there's an easy answer, anyway. Despite all my issues, ones I think are rightfully valid, I still leave Night City with this lingering feeling that maybe, just maybe, Cyberpunk 2077 understood itself more than I ever gave it credit for. Maybe it was punk all along, just not in the way I expected. It just took some time to finally see it. Let me know what you think of Cyberpunk 2077. Have you always been a Cyberpunk truther? Or did you only get into it after Phantom Liberty? Oh, and before I forget, are you excited for another season of something to do with Edge Runners? Because I know I am. Until next time, my name is Christian. This is Save Room. We'll see you in the next one.